Our three speakers are Richard Dennis, Olivia Carter and Rob Moody, and they'll be talking about sustaining a healthy body and mind. I think that the title could have been extended a bit further to include a healthy society and a healthy environment as well. We tend to think of these things in separate boxes, the mind, the body, society. But when it comes to health and well-being, we all know, in fact, they are intimately connected. And our first speaker this evening is Richard Dennis. Richard is an economist, known usually as the dismal science, economics, though in my experience, Richard usually manages to bring some mirth to the subject, some levity. He often comments on public policy issues in his role as Executive Director of the Australia Institute. He's also an adjunct associate professor in the Crawford School of Economics and Government at the Australian National University in Canberra. He's co-author of the book Affluenza, and he's going to speak to us this evening about our health and the environment, about how those two things interact, how each affects the other. Richard Dennis.
Thanks, Peter. And the beautiful thing about representing the dismal science is everyone always has low expectations. So you just keep them low and we'll all have a good time. Thank you for coming along this evening and for inviting me along. It's an interesting, for me, a very interesting topic, the nexus between, as Peter said, the brain, the body, the environment, and the environment broadly defined. So I was thinking about this using my brain and thought, well, I don't usually do this, but I thought, well, actually there's a good personal example that for me highlights a lot of the interconnections here, and that is I went to the doctor last year, and I know that because I haven't been to the doctor for about 5 years, so it was a big deal. And I went in and, nothing terribly wrong, a couple of things, and they must have given me 4 or 5 things to follow up, and I thought, well, I haven't got time to do that, so I haven't been back. Assume all's well. I'm an optimist, not that dismal. But I guess from my point of view, I'm too busy to worry about my health. There's no crisis. There's no particular reason to think anything's wrong. So surely it's rational, economist, surely it's rational to not take any of the sensible pieces of advice that my doctor gave me in terms of following up certain things. So I guess what I want to start by talking about tonight in terms of our brain and our health and our environment is, are our brains up to it? Mine doesn't appear to be. I'm currently ignoring some sensible medical advice because I've convinced myself they're chasing me again. I've convinced myself that in the short term, it's not worth me investing the time in certain courses of action. And that sort of led me to think about a whole range of areas where it's pretty clear, if we think about it. And every time I say think and brain, I think there must, I don't know, apologies, but I'm not trying to make thinking or brain jokes throughout, but it's very hard to talk about the brain without saying what you thought about. I was thinking about all the examples of places where as individuals and as a society, the actions of individuals suggest that we're not really up to making good decisions in terms of looking after our own health. So, for example, not every summer when the Christmas holidays are around, we see an inordinate amount of advertising reminding people to wear seatbelts. Now, let's be clear, there's a really complex cause and effect between driving a car at 100 kilometres an hour and hitting something. What happens is people go straight through the windscreen. Okay? Scientists have intuited this over the years, lots of observations, sadly, and there's this radical theory that if you wear a seatbelt, it might stop you putting literally your head through the windscreen. Yet, as a society, not only do we have to force car companies through regulation to install seatbelts, but we have to introduce laws that force people to wear seatbelts, and we have to pay police to drive around and check if we're wearing seatbelts. And year after year, we have to spend tens of millions of dollars reminding people that if they don't wear their seatbelts, they might have a crash and put their head through a windscreen. So my point is, if it takes that much effort to get humans to take a simple precaution when it comes to driving a car, wear a seatbelt, what chance have we got at entrusting individuals' health to individuals? And more importantly, what chance have we got as a society when we ask people who can't be bothered going back to the doctor, may or may not be bothered wearing seatbelts? What chance have we got as a society in relying on those same people to make long-term decisions about the health of our society and the health of our environment? So my question, which I don't have an answer to, is are we smart enough for this? Because seatbelts doesn't look very challenging. Like of all the sort of public policy problems, you would have thought seatbelts would have been sorted out by now. Now, of course, we're introducing new problems at a rapid rate. And, 20 years ago, it was very hard to send text messages when you were driving. We've solved that problem. Yet now we have to put ads on television saying these really complex messages about scientific cause and effect, like don't text while you drive. It's dangerous. Frankly, again, if we're not smart enough to figure that out for ourselves, what kind of mess are we going to get ourselves in for? Now, so let's take cars. We don't seem to be able to trust people to wear seatbelts without coercion and encouragement. We don't seem to be able to trust people not to text and make mobile phone calls while they're driving. We don't seem to be able to trust people to not drive too fast. Again, we have to not just spend a lot of money telling people not to, but we spend a lot of time on police trying to deter people. But let's take the example of the car and go up a level of abstraction. Let's look at what not just the way we drive our cars tells us about our brains and our capacity to look after our health, but the actual choice of cars as a mode of transport. We know that, I don't know the stats for Melbourne, you guys have got slightly better transport than most cities in Australia, but in Sydney, where the congestion is, unlivable, the average speed of traffic is slower than the average speed of the horse and cart, literally, in the 18th century. Now, don't get me wrong, it's far more comfortable, okay, and it's nice to be able to plug your own music in, and there are all sorts of other benefits. But in terms of getting from A to B, not only are cars quite dangerous, they're not very quick. Now, of course they'd be quick if everybody else wasn't on the road. And apologies if you've heard me use this example before, but basically every car ad you've ever seen has got one car on the road. One car. And it's usually a good-looking road, the kind of road you'll never drive on. And, because this wouldn't work on us, we're too smart, okay? But people who aren't here tonight are clearly influenced by these ads. Because what the ad says is, buy this car and you buy freedom. And there's that beautiful ad, this was my favourite, it was for Honda, where they stripped the ad right back to its bare essentials. And there was a nude guy flying down the road. That's how free he felt, because he'd bought a Honda. Now, of course, the car companies sell us freedom, but of course governments deliver congestion. Okay, so it's not the car's fault. The car's delivering exactly what it said it would. But every morning we sit in traffic. Not us, no, we're not too silly. But others sit in traffic, and every morning they look at other people and think, what are all these idiots doing on the road? And it's a very self-reflective, self-aware person that every morning says, I'm an idiot. Look at me, I'm traffic. I'm slowing everybody else down. Why am I doing this to them again today? No, because we know that we're in a hurry. And of course, while they might have statistics and stuff that shows that, a well-designed city, people catching public transport and people riding their bikes would get to work quicker than people driving in congested roads. We all know that's what the statistics say, but we know better than that. It's like those statistics about traffic accidents and seatbelts. Other people will have the crashes. Other people will go through the windscreen when they're texting. Not me. That's other people. Our brains have this incredible capacity, sadly, to see the world through our own prism, to see other people's behaviour in terms of how it affects us, and by definition, downplay. Again, not accusing you of this, no one in here would be this selfish, but most people who aren't here tonight seem to be far more worried, basically, about themselves. So again, if we can't drive our cars sensibly, and we can't choose modes of transport sensibly, then when we look at our human brain and our health, can we really be trusted to make good decisions? Now, one of the main causes of ill health in a rich country like Australia is a sedentary lifestyle. One of the main causes of so many of our chronic diseases is lack of exercise. And lack of exercise is, of course, linked to overweight, but the best solution to being overweight is exercise. Now, when we ask people why they don't exercise, again, no one in here would fall for this, but it's lack of time. Most people would say, look, I'd love to exercise, I'd love to go to the gym and sit on a treadmill for an hour after work, but I'm due in the traffic. I'd love to, pound the artificial pavement every morning, but no, I promised my kids I'd be in the car on the hands-free talking to them so we could have some quality time together. So I told you, look, and again, no one's perfect in this, I said at the beginning, I'm too stupid to go back to the doctor because I think I'm too busy. Most people say they're too busy to schedule exercise into their life, yet we choose modes of transport that don't require any exercise from us. Some, crazy talk, would say that maybe we should combine those two problems. Maybe if we've got a sedentary lifestyle and maybe if the roads are getting so congested they're unusable, crazy talk, maybe there's some solution that kills two birds with one stone. Again, the question is, are our brains up to dealing with this problem? So I guess what I want to talk about in terms of our brains, in terms of trying to both interpret, understand, and hopefully more importantly do something about this, we often think about how the environment affects our health. We know that pollution and smog can give us respiratory disease. We worry about these things. So obviously it's other people causing the smog, so it's other people driving cars making me sick. We know that even forms of pollution like noise pollution, to the extent that they interrupt people's sleep, can impose all sorts of adverse impacts on our health. So the link between the environment and health, I think, is quite well understood. But I think it's also important to look back the other way and look at how our health affects the environment. And by that I mean, if one of the main causes of ill health is lack of time to go to a doctor as a preventative measure, lack of time to do exercise because we've got to drive the car. I think you can actually look at these causes of our personal ill health as in many ways driving the causes of many of the environmental problems which we then worry about. So what's the common theme here? Well, I think the common theme is the wonderful irony that the one thing that we increasingly, well, the one thing, that's a big call, one of the many things that we, it's like Kevin Rudd, everything's the number one priority. One of the most important things that people seem to crave these days is time. And one of the things that people who don't have enough time want as a substitute is convenience. That is, I'm busy, I'm striding boldly, purposefully, getting all these things done. I don't have time, so I need convenience. And convenience, I think, is perhaps, well, it's a wonderful thing to aspire to, but I guess the point that I'd like to make is I think convenience actually drives both ill health and stress, as well as so many of the environmental problems we have. Why don't people catch the bus to work tomorrow? Why don't people change their behaviours in ways that their doctor would suggest are good for them? Oh, it's not a good day. I've got this meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning. Tomorrow isn't quite the right time to start this. I need convenience. And the beautiful thing about a car is it promises but doesn't deliver convenience. Right? There's this big thing that's in complete control. We don't have to wait like everybody else for something. We can get out there and do it. So when you think about how convenience is marketed to us, I think it leads to all sorts of common causes of ill health, both personal and collective. Convenient foods, well, typically they're high in fat, high in sugar, high in salt, and not fresh. Why aren't they fresh? Why aren't there fresh convenience foods? Well, because they need to be ready whenever we need them. They need to be deep fried to within an inch of their life to kill all bacteria. Unfortunately, if we do that 3 times a week, they'll kill us in 15 years' time. So convenient food, convenient transport, convenient shopping. Ask yourself why shops are so keen to give you free plastic bags. They gouge you for everything else, but they're determined to give you a free plastic bag. They'll go to Canberra on a regular basis to defend your right to a plastic bag. Why are the shops so generous in the plastic bag department? Because they're terrified of you thinking before you went to the shop. They're terrified of you showing up with a list. They're terrified of you knowing that there's already milk and a lettuce in the fridge at home. So that when you call in conveniently on your way home from work and you drift aimlessly around with the trolley, just putting stuff in because you might need it, only to get home and discover that you didn't need it last week, so you chuck last week's lettuce out, put this week's lettuce in, that convenience is very profitable. Because they don't care whether you eat the food or not. They just care if you buy the food. The car companies don't care if you really get to work on time. They just care if you buy the car. So, to end, I think that the thing that, taken back, you strip things away, one of the main causes of personal ill health is lack of time. Yet, lack of time to go to the doctor, lack of time to ride a bike to work, lack of time to prepare a shopping list. And not only is that creating an unhealthy environment for us as individuals, when we add it all up, we create a society which is in itself deeply, deeply, deeply unhealthy, literally unsustainable. But the challenge is, are we, the people who, again, not us here tonight, who are too stupid to go back to the doctor and just too stupid to wear seatbelts without being asked, can we really trust those people to make the long-term decisions that a healthy environment needs? Well, I'll just end with, I hope so.
Thank you, Richard Dennis. I told you that Richard could make economics funny, although I think the underlying message was a rather sober one. If we're not smart enough to make those decisions for ourselves, perhaps we need a smart pill that we can take that will help us be a bit more rational and make better decisions. It's an issue that will be addressed by our second speaker, Olivia Carter. Olivia Carter is a National Health and Medical Research Council Research Fellow and lecturer at the University of Melbourne. And she's just come back to Australia from previously being a postdoctoral research and teaching fellow at Harvard University. She's Executive Director of the Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness. And she's going to speak about the role of pharmacology in perception and attention, an issue which raises very important, very difficult and very interesting questions, ethical questions among them. Should we use drugs to enhance our brain, reduce our need for sleep, help us forget disturbing memories, and so on? Please welcome Olivia Carter.
Thank you. So the topic of today's discussion is, can our bodies and minds cope with what the future holds? And I guess as a neuroscientist, if someone asks me this question, I have to respond with a very firm yes. Of course our minds are going to cope with the future. After our last speaker, I need to sort of preface this and explain, I'm really talking about the brain as sort of a biological organism. It's possible we might shoot ourselves through the car windscreen because we're too stupid to put on a seatbelt. But in terms of the brain coping, there really doesn't seem to be a critical point of overload. We're not computers that will just crash all of a sudden because we push too many buttons. I haven't even heard the most pessimistic neuroscientists suggesting that there'll be some critical point that a healthy brain will become overloaded. The brain's response to too much information is very simple. It just forgets it. Having said that, the world is becoming faster and faster, and we're being bombarded with more and more information. In most parts of the world, the expectations placed on workers and families to compete and succeed is increasing every day. And faced with these increasing pressures, it will always be human nature to try to adapt and use science and new technologies to help to make life easier. This is not a new phenomenon. We need to remember that throughout history, people have invented or adapted new technologies to make their lives easier. So what I want to talk about today is not whether we will cope, but rather what this coping is going to look like, and the interesting implications this might have on society and our view of ourselves. Now, I want to be really clear. Mental illness is in an area that is only now just starting to be recognised as a significant problem in our community and receive the attention it deserves. But today I'm not talking about disease, I'm not talking about the unwell mind, but rather the average normal brain, if there is such a thing. I want to talk about the use of drugs to enhance or alter a person's mind to make it better than normal, better than well. In this field, people often refer to this as cosmetic pharmacology. So I'm going to briefly discuss 4 interesting new discoveries and advances in pharmacology that, rightly or wrongly, I think will have a huge impact on how we live in the future. The first area is sleep. We all know how difficult it is to function without sleep. And just as an interesting aside, it's still very much a debate between scientists why we need sleep at all. But that's a different story. What I want to talk about is the drug modafinil, which first became available in Australia in 2002. At the time, it was prescribed for narcolepsy or other major sleep disorders, but it is now becoming increasingly used for non-medical reasons to just simply reduce the need for sleep. The truth is that nobody knows exactly how it works, and importantly, people also don't know what any of the long-term side effects are. But at the moment, the general claims are quite unbelievable, and the idea is that you can take a single pill of this drug and remove the need for sleep for an entire night with no obvious side effects, even multiple nights. And the important thing is it's not like other stimulant drugs like caffeine or other sorts of amphetamines, which may allow you to stay awake for longer, but then there's always this need to catch up sleep later. People that use modafinil claim that you can skip 1 or 2 nights of sleep and simply go back to normal. It's very easy to see how people would find a drug like this very useful. There are already reports of soldiers being given drugs like this to allow them to stay alert during long combat missions. And more surprisingly, there are even reports that university academics are starting to use modafinil to increase their productivity. I should make it clear that I've never taken modafinil in an attempt to increase my own productivity. But I have actually been offered it, twice in fact, while I was working in the US. One colleague described modafinil to me. They describe it this way. They said, it's great. Every time my work starts to build up or I have a deadline, I just take one tablet, work through the night, and I can finish everything off. It's great just to get everything finished. It's like having an extra day to get everything done. I'm presuming some of the philosophical issues associated with this sort of drug use are becoming apparent. But before I talk about these issues, I want to go directly to the next type of pharmacological enhancement, which involves memory. With the ageing population, there are literally billions of dollars being spent on drugs that can reduce all symptoms of dementia. And one of the biggest symptoms being focused on by the drug companies is memory. Most memory-enhancing drugs are designed specifically for people with different types of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And one drug that is currently available is sold under the name of Lucidril. The interesting thing is that it is now clear that any drug that can improve memory in people with Alzheimer's disease is also likely to improve memory for everybody else. The science behind this is relatively simple. I mean, it's complicated, but the main idea is quite simple. Neuroscientists know that for memories to be formed in the brain, the neurons, the cells that make up the brain, need to build connections between each other. This is obviously a very important part of learning and growing up. We need to learn about all the things that can hurt us and all the things that can make us feel better. And of course, if you're at school or university, you literally have to remember entire books of information so that you can regurgitate it all back again when it comes to exams. Now, what these new drugs do is they increase the strength of the new connections artificially. And what this will mean is simply that we'll need to do less work to remember more. Now, when I talk about this future where we may need to sleep less and be able to remember more, how does it make you feel? Are you excited about these developments or are you terrified? Some would say it would be great to be able to sleep less and remember more. But big problems become apparent when you start to think about what this might mean if the drugs became very widely available in the future. Imagine if you're going for a promotion at work or are desperate to do well in your exams. Your success is generally going to be judged against your peers. So the question is it okay for you to take a memory-enhancing pill or a drug that means that you won't have to sleep for a few nights just to get ahead, to help you to actually achieve a higher level of performance and maybe even to become smarter? And I guess one clear difference between the issues of cognitive enhancers and earlier problems of steroid use in athletes is that in this case both individuals and society might actually benefit if people were smarter and more productive. For example, some would argue that we should be encouraging all young medical students to use memory enhancers to help them remember as much of the medical training as possible. I mean, it could actually save lives. If a perfectly intelligent man decided to take a course to learn new memory techniques and started reading all sorts of self-help books, then we would generally respect this person for wanting to improve themselves. The question is, if the same man decided he wanted to take drugs to become smarter, then should this be treated the same way? I guess one option is to say no, it's not the same. We should ban all use of all intelligent enhancing drugs. And then do we also say no to taking drugs that help us stay alert? At the moment, most working professionals start the day with a coffee. But now, as people are having to work longer hours just to put food on the table, drugs like modafinil are now becoming used particularly commonly in the US by shift workers so that they can work late into the night. These people are living their lives like this because they have no other option. They simply can't afford to support their families without working night and day. Do we ban people from taking these drugs knowing full well that it will mean that they will lose their jobs and be forced to rely on welfare? It's examples like this that cause the greatest concern. Because if you don't allow people to take drugs, it will have a tragic effect on their lives. But if we do allow people to use drugs in this way, then we run a very serious risk of expecting that all people will and should take drugs. If some people can hold down their jobs because they are working through the night, then employers might view anyone that is not willing to take drugs as being lazy or disinterested.